All right. So let's talk about asexual reproduction. That is what mitosis is all about. Asexual reproduction in mitosis is where one cell makes an exact copy of itself. There's a couple of specific examples that we're going to look at, and then I want to walk you through a couple of other methods by which, in a real life scenario, you would see this kind of stuff happening. Okay, this asexual reproduction. So the first one is called binary fusion, so you're going to want to make sure you're familiar with that. And this is basically where one parent cell makes an identical daughter cell. And the the microscope movie that I'm going to show you tomorrow actually shows a paramecium, which is a single-celled organism actually going through the cell division process. So you'll see one cell actually dividing into two cells. But that's binary fusion. So that's the first one. Typically you're going to see that in prokaryotes, so there's not going to be a nucleus with membrane-bound DNA. It just all is in that massive, uncondensed, uncoiled, non-bound by a nuclear membrane type of configuration. And then, let's see, my little pop-up doesn't want to go. There we go. Okay, so then the second type is called budding. So the first asexual reproduction was binary fusion. Secondary is called budding, and I'm going to show you a computer generation of how this would work. But this is an organism. It's called a hydra. It's a microscopic. Well, you could probably microscopic. You might be able to see it with a microscope if it's big enough. Organism that lives in water. And what it does, I mean, it kind of looks like a plant, but it's not. It's actually an organism. And in order to reproduce, it does what we call budding, where it's going to grow an appendage on it. And then when that appendage gets to a certain size, it basically just breaks off and goes and plants itself and becomes its own organism. But genetically, it's identical to its parent. That's why it's asexual reproduction. So that's another type of asexual reproduction. The next one is called vegetative fragmentation or vegetative reproduction. And you've probably seen this if you go to the pantry and you've got an old bag of potatoes in there. You see the eye is already starting to sprout roots, right? Well, that's what we're talking about here. Plants have the ability to be able to grow a copy of itself and fragment itself and become a whole nother plant. There's lots of different ways that they do this, but basically it could be like the potato through a tuber or a root system. It can be from a shoot or an offshoot or a leaf. Propagation of some sort all makes an exact copy of that same plant. But that's fragmentation or vegetative reproduction. Those are your next ones. Okay, kind of leaving that behind. Remember, this is a repeat, but you're going to see it again, and you'll probably see it again when we do in genetics. Remember, the single most basic unit is the cell. You put a bunch of cells together, you get tissues. You put a bunch of tissues together, you get an organ. Organs together, you get an organ system, and the organ systems together, you get the whole organism, right? So just remember that hierarchy of how cells interact with each other. That's not going to change, and we've seen that before, and we're going to see it again, so don't forget it. The last topic that I want to talk about is stem cells in this one. This is a very controversial topic. It has huge political ramifications. In fact, there's been times when the elected officials have become so heated about this topic that it has actually won and lost elections. So what we're talking about is there are cells that exist in our bodies which are not differentiated yet, meaning they haven't developed into a specific heart cell or muscle cell or lung cell or kidney cell. They don't know what they're going to be yet. Okay, and you'll find these stem cells in an adult in their bone marrow, or, and this is where the controversy comes in, because the other place they take them from is they're embryonic, which means they're from the embryos. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on this when we have a class discussion on the importance of stem cells, and we'll look at it also in our genetic unit coming up next. But basically, you need to know that there's a cell. It has no specific job function yet. It can become anything that your body needs, and that's what the stem cell is. Okay? It can be any cell. And that's what we're going to look into. So what my animation is showing you here is these are embryonic stem cells. So you can see there was the fertilized egg develops into the embryo. You've got this these small amount of cells that basically could become the muscle cell of the baby, the nerve cell of the baby, or the red blood cells of the baby. Okay, and like I said, we'll have a live discussion on that tomorrow and or Wednesday if I don't see you till Wednesday, and I've got some video clips that'll kind of give you some of the headliners on all this in the news and so forth. Okay, then the last topic is about uncontrolled cell growth, which we saw this before, but remember, uncontrolled cell growth it's mutants, right? It leads to a tumor. The tumor might be benign, meaning it's better. Okay, that's the BB. Meaning it's not cancerous and it just is a mass that maybe just can be removed, but it's not cancerous, and that's important. Or it can be malignant, and that's the mal one, that's the bad one, where it definitely is cancerous, and you know, some cancers can be lethal and fatal. So we're going to talk a little bit more about cancer, but remember, cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. Those signals that exist in the regular cell cycle to grow, develop, divide, turn off, turn on, those signals are gone, and this cancer cell starts operating kind of on its own terms. It goes rogue, if you will, for you in the video game world, and just starts, you know, doing its own thing and divides uncontrollably until it becomes this massive clump of cancerous cells that we call a tumor again. All right, so that's what I have for you tonight. Talking about asexual reproduction, we're talking about stem cells, we're talking about that hierarchy of cells to an organism, and cancer cells, how they're uncontrolled. So hopefully you got all that, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Oh yeah, here's some nice pictures. You saw those before in case you want to revisit them. Cancer, not a pretty thing. See you tomorrow.